All right, this is going to be a short video talking about what the heck does this chapter have to do with the previous two chapters. So the structure of this class, this is a topics class. We spend 2 weeks on all these different topics in discrete math, but they are organized in a very specific way, right? We talked about sets. And then when we talked about functions and relations, right, there was a lot of important things that we used about sets, right? The sets formed our domains, our codomains. We talked about like images of sets, and then we ended up doing a couple other, we talked about like surjections and stuff like that, which all related to sets as well. And partitions were very useful for connecting different relations and stuff like that. Well, now we're going to connect this chapter with sets and functions. And we've already said some of these, but we're just going to bring them back and make things a little bit more clear. So remember, again, let's look at a digraph over here and an undirected graph. Remember when we talked about, and I've already mentioned a couple of these, but I'm going to reiterate them. When we talked about symmetric relations or symmetric functions, right? Symmetric relations where if A is related to B, then B is related to A. And we can see that visually on a digraph if every arrow in one direction had an arrow in the other direction. So the relation, right? Digraphs and relations kind of go hand in hand. There's a relation for every digraph. The relation for this digraph would not be symmetric, right? Because Muhammad Ali is related to Sonny Liston, but Sonny Liston is not related to Muhammad Ali. Whereas over here, this relation would be symmetric. You can go from Washington, D.C. to Fredericksburg, and you can go from Fredericksburg to Washington, D.C. So symmetry can be seen in graphs, right? And in general, digraphs are usually not going to be symmetric. We had our DAG over here. This is definitely not symmetric. You pour brown stuff in the bowl, and then you mix the ingredients. You can't mix the ingredients before pouring the brown stuff in the bowl. Well, actually, I guess that is what happens when you buy pre-made brownie mix, but let's not worry about that. And then we also talked about a little bit about connected graphs, right? This is not a connected graph. We said a connected graph is every two nodes are connected. And again, the president, well, I don't know who made this graph, but in this graph, the president is not connected to the Civil War. There is no path between president and Civil War for this graph. Okay, so this is not a connected graph. And specifically, graphs that are not connected have subgraphs, have connected subgraphs, right? And we mentioned that this subgraph over here is connected. Everything in this blue area, right, is connected to everything else in this blue area. There is a path between any two nodes here, okay? And again, this is also a cyclic graph. There is a cycle in this graph, right? We can go Abraham Lincoln, Washington, D.C., Ford's Theater in a cycle, okay? So anyway, as this graph was created, and we can create a partition from this, right? Graphs, not to get on too much of an unconnected rant, right? But to connect the concepts with earlier stuff, this graph, this connected subgraph, can be used to create a partition of the set, right? If we think the set of all these vertices, think of the set of all these nodes, right? This subset, this blue subset, together with this green subset, form a partition. So if a graph is unconnected, then the pieces, the connected subgraphs of that unconnected total graph, form a partition of the original set of all of those vertices. So that's another way that these things are connected. Okay. And that's pretty much the main comment for this video. In the future, this is kind of this end of our little introduction to graphs, our introduction to structures, because again, really all these graphs and later on we're going to talk about trees, really what this all is the mathematical abstraction to data structures. It works for most data structures anyway. And so, yeah, after this, we're going to start getting into traversal strategies. We're going to get into a lot more algorithms as well. We'll talk about the shortest path algorithm. We'll talk about Dijkstra's algorithm, minimal connecting edge sets. We're going to talk about traversing binary trees, lots of things coming up in the future that I think is all very exciting. So let me know if you have questions. Again, I know there's a lot of terminology in these videos, but we're just going to keep practicing on them and keep on trying to make these connections when we talk about it. And hopefully it'll start connecting in all of the nodes of these topics in your brain. Hopefully this will be an undirected graph of topics so that you can go both ways between concepts, and then you can see the paths between these concepts, and that these are all cyclical, right? And that okay, I'm done. All right. Have a good one. Goodbye.